Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we now switch from pharmaceuticals to mining. We have a similar life to the pharmaceutical industry. We have to start doing research and development. The risk is quite high in the beginning, but gradually you improve the story, and that's what I'm going to tell you now. So basically we have 3 projects in Russia, and I'm going to speak about those, and in particular on the first one, because it is the one which will make a big difference to Eurasia in the coming 12 to 18 months. Just as a background, we've been 20 years on AIM, and we were probably, I believe we were the first, it's before my time, but we were the first mining company to be listed on AIM. And during that time, we've had a lot of success from exploration, and we are now basically focused on the 3 projects which we're developing at the present time. Just to talk a little bit about what we're looking for platinum and palladium and related metals, a bit of gold. And one of the mysteries of the last few years has been, why is the platinum price so poor? And that chart on the bottom right shows that even though consumption has exceeded production for well over 6 years, there's still, the price is sitting in a kind of plateau for the last few years, since 2009. And one of the reasons has been that there was some significant stockpiles of platinum metal, which are almost now disappeared. The palladium price, on the other hand, has been doing very well in the last 12 months, partly because of the talk about diesel, which uses platinum, now losing favour in preference for petrol, which tends to use palladium. But in actual fact, the real arbitrage between the 2 metals is the price. And palladium was cheaper than platinum, but now there's only a $150 difference in the price. That just shows you what's driving the PGM consumption within the motor industry. Is the regulations regarding emissions from vehicles, and gradually more and more of the world is being required to enforce higher and higher emission standards. I'm not going to go into that in detail because I'm a geologist, not a metallurgist. And the outlook, on the other hand, for PGM is quite good, in that half the world's mines are uneconomic and have been for several years. South Africa in particular has a lot of old mines which are labour intensive. That is a huge political problem for those mining companies, and indeed for the politics of the country. We, working in Russia, have a completely different working environment, and in fact our project, which we're mining, we have one small mine at the present time, which I'll speak about in a moment, and our operating cost is down here somewhere. So touching on that mine, it's called West Catlin, and it's in the Ural Mountains, in 2 hours flight east of Moscow. And we did trial mining at the end of last year, and this year is our first full season. It's an alluvial platinum mine, which means that we are washing gravels to make a concentrate, and the concentrate is then further refined in an on-site laboratory, and then the platinum concentrate is taken down to Ekaterinburg, 400 kilometers away, to the refinery, and we are written a check for the platinum about 3 weeks later. So we did something really unusual. Oh, I don't know if you want me to talk about the mining method very much, but this little diagram summarizes it. You basically dig it up, stockpile it, then wash it through a washing plant, and you collect the concentrate and further concentrate it in the laboratory to make your deliverable to the refinery, which is about 75 to 80% platinum concentrate. We did something unusual for a mining company. The last 6 years in PGMs, and indeed in metal prices generally, have been pretty appalling. And raising equity means we risk diluting our shareholders who've been very supportive. We risk diluting them excessively if we all the time have to go back to the market, if that's the only source of finance. So what we did was we split this particular mine, we split the costs of the revenue by allowing a contractor to come in and take 70% of the revenue in return for covering all the capital investment and all the operating cost. And our responsibility then is to look after the reserves, manage the development of them, continue the exploration, because we have reserves and resources, and we managed to persuade the contractor to contribute to that as well, to the tune of $1 million, which is roughly what it'll take to convert most of the resources to reserves in the next 3 years. And the highlights of the of the revenue mean that we basically receive 30% of the revenue with no deductions other than the royalty, which is we both take the royalty, the government royalty. And it means, of course, that in the short term, we're effectively receiving a big chunk of the profit merely because we don't have to cover the operating cost. That just shows you some of the equipment. It doesn't look terribly sophisticated, and it isn't sophisticated. It's basically dig, load, wash, concentrate. And that's inside the laboratory. Again, it's very simple. It's actually the earliest form of mining in history, was going back in the Bronze Age when people were panning. This is the same thing, only a bigger scale. I won't dwell on this too much, but this just shows you the breakdown of reserves, which is in orange, in the resource areas in grey. And we're looking at a life of about 12 to 14 years for the entire reserves and resources. And that schedules more or less the different areas of the blocks over the first period in detail, and then extrapolating out to the end of the mine life. So to summarize on that, we have targeted this year 100 kilos of production, and I'm hopeful that we will make the target. That's basically the basis of our plans for the year and for our finances as well. Then we move to the big project, the one that we believe is a company maker for Eurasia. Will take us from being a junior explorer to being a mining company of some significance. We have recently had approved 2 million ounces by the state government. In Russia, we approve our reserves in a different way from in the West, in that the due diligence on the project is done by the government, not by an independent consultant. So you've all heard of, perhaps those of you who know a bit about mining, we have these JORC reports and 43 101s in Canada, all to give you a nice rubber stamp, yes, we love your project. Well, in Russia, you sit down and you send in your reports and all your documents, and backup files are all sent into a committee for geology, and they look through it all. Then you sit down at a table with 15 people across the table, all experts in different areas, in environment, hydrogeology, reserves, geology, everything. And they grill you, and then if you survive that, then you get your reserves approved. So we've gone through that first step. The next step is you apply after that, after the reserves are approved, you apply for a discovery certificate, which we have lodged last week, and that usually takes 30 to 40 days. And then we apply for the mining license, which the total time period it takes between reserves approval all the way through to mining license grant is typically 12 to 15 months. So we're partly down the road for that. One thing we did, which is really unusual for a project at this stage of development, is thanks to one of our directors having a very good relationship with this particular company, Sinosteel, is that we negotiated an EPC contract for the development of the mine once we have our license. And that means that Sinosteel has agreed to do the engineering, procurement, and construction of the project. And this is a big step for a small company to know that we have a contract in place worth 176 million US dollars. And of that, 85% will be provided as a loan within Sinosteel during the development phase, during the 2 years construction. And that would cover, the loan will cover 85% of the capital estimate. We will then need to find the $25 million. But within the contract with Sinosteel, over the 2 year period, there will be a $50 million payback to us for some of the works which will be subcontracted to us. And so in balance, we believe that the $25 million will be some form of 2 year loan, which will be paid back by the time the project is handed over to us. And the advantage of that is that the Sinosteel loan sits in their books, and it's LIBOR at 3.5% for 10 years. And we only put the loan on our books after the plant is handed over, successfully commissioned. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on geology unless I get a call from below somewhere. Because I'm told I'm always too technical, so I won't be too technical if you don't want me to be. But that summarizes the economics, the headline numbers of the Sinosteel agreement. And that summarizes the reserves, which are basically in 2 open pit developments, which we plan to do. And that is what we've applied for the discovery certificate of those 2 reserves and resources blocks there. And I should add that what is left to do in Mancha Tundra is, apart from putting some form of financing in place for the $25 million. We will also be looking at hiring an owner's team, which means a management group, because it's an EPC contract. You may have heard of an EPCM contract, which means the management has to be done by somebody. It'll be done by us, but we will bring in probably a contracting group who will provide the expertise in the areas required to supervise the Sinosteel development, and also to manage the company's interests in negotiations with Sinosteel. And once again, now that we've tried this model of contractor owner at the little West Catlin project, we think that there is some potential to do the same thing in Mancha Tundra in the Kola Peninsula. Then thirdly, we are looking at a gold tailings project, also in the Urals. The Urals stretches more or less from that Semanovsky project all the way up to the coast, pretty well on the 60-degree longitude, 60-degree east longitude line. And we basically have done some work to check the viability of this tailings, and we believe that it is viable. It's a very simple form of mining because gold has already been mined from other mines, and the waste has been put into this repository. And what we do is we know exactly how much gold is there from the drilling and test work done on the reserve. We know what the recoveries are going to be in terms of when we process the material. And we are now looking at, can we raise about $5 million in capital to develop the project. The reason why we were doing the small West Catlin Platinum project and this small Semanovsky project was exactly for the reason I gave you at the beginning, which is that if equity is expensive and it's hard to get, as it was for the last 6 or 7 years, this provides cash flow for relatively small capital investment. As you saw with West Catlin, there was actually zero capital investment. So it's what we have tried to do, is minimize dilution if we can for the existing shareholders. And that just shows you the layout of the tailings repository, which is the one we have studied. The old mine that processed ores from other areas, which then put the tailings into that pond. It still operates occasionally, and they're using this third pond out here to the south. And basically, when we're making our plans, we're planning to put the plant over here. And the process is really simple. The tailings is very fine-grained, fine silt and sand, and it's slurried into these leach tanks. And the pregnant solution, as we say, goes through a filter press so that the solids are removed, and the liquid then passes into resin columns, which extract the gold from the cyanide solution, and the cyanide solution is recycled. And then once the columns are loaded, the resin beads in the columns are shipped down the road to a refinery where it's smelted and the gold is recovered. So, in summary, we are developing a very large PGM project in Mancha Tundra in the Kola Peninsula in northwest Russia. We are optimistic that this is going to be the one that will make Eurasia a significant company. In the meantime, we're mining at West Catlin, producing cash flow, which in over an 18-month period will replace the need for any equity capital. We are looking at repeating this type of development at Semanovsky, again, perhaps with a contract miner prepared to split a revenue arrangement with us. And we hope, set to sail the company into a good period after this rather difficult period of low PGM prices. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody? No hands? Well, I've got a few. We've got a gentleman just there.
I was hoping someone else.
No, you go first.
Oh, thanks. With the main project, what was the timing on that?
The licensing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the discovery certificate from last week is 30 to 40 days, okay? And that's the one that gives you title. The discovery certificate is the first piece of paper you get in Russia that gives you title. In actual fact, if you're just on an exploration license before that, you don't have title unless you find reserves. So the first thing you do is if you find reserves, you then file for the discovery. I mean, get them registered first of all, then file for the discovery. Once they give you the discovery certificate, you now have the exclusive right to apply for a mining license. And of course, we're preparing the documentation for that as I speak, because that's the next step. And then the process involves consultations with half a dozen ministries, all checking to see, are they happy with you developing this mine, and then you get the mining license. Yeah. We've been through this before at West Catlin, and that's why I'm giving you the time estimate. It was 15 months for us from the reserve registration through to mining license.
Okay. Just trying to think if there's another question. As a shareholder, obviously I'm a bit frustrated with where the price is.
It's been very tough for all of us, yeah.
Yeah. And when do you, so you think from the licensing perspective, that's when?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have the mining license before we can start work on the ground.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say we couldn't start preparing, detailed engineering plans and so on, which would be the next step if we were starting in the morning. But, it would be foolish to do that before we had title. It's still a legal thing. So I want to be sure we have the discovery certificate at the very least before I look seriously at doing applied work on the project.
Okay. And you were kind of intimating that you were hoping not to have to dilute the...
That's correct. Yeah, don't forget I'm a shareholder as well. So, it matters. But at the same time, there are other ways of we've shown that there are other ways of financing, and we're trying to remain focused on alternatives, okay? So that's all I can say at the moment.
Thank you.
Next question, anybody? Ooh, two at the back there.
Are you in any way concerned about the political situation in Russia, bearing in mind Putin's deteriorating with the West and democracies?
Politics for mining is always a concern. But having said that, we've been there for 20 years. Our Russian team are extremely experienced, and in fact, 3 of them have been with us for the 20 years, and they are very good people. And we don't behave as a foreign company if we can. We do everything locally. And in terms of judging Russia versus all the other countries in the world, I mean, how can you? South Africa has just gone and decided to make the companies give out more of their equity, just on the whim. To call it a whim is perhaps a bit strong, but nevertheless, just out of the blue, And I mean, that's supposed to be a stable country, So I don't, I even remember as a young geologist when they nationalized a mine in Canada, that you can't believe such a thing happened, but it happened, So I don't worry about it. We just get on with our job and do the work, and
Thank you. Once Tundra comes into production, I know this is far into the future, but how long do you think it would take you to repay the loan, which becomes your liability?
It's a good question. I mean, what's the platinum palladium price going to be then? But in theory, the project life will be in the order of, we're looking at around 130,000 ounces a year with 2 million ounces of reserves. So, if you do the sums, it's 15, 16 year anyway. And then typically we try and get the payback in the normal margin, 3-4 years, I suppose. And the development itself will take about 2 years from scratch, once we get the license. So.
Other questions? You talked about title. Is this a lease you're taking on the land?
It'll be a mining license for 25 years.
On government land, is it?
For mining, all land is government.
Government, okay.
Yeah.
In the Catlin Peninsula, there used to be a lot of palladium and platinum mines. I think nothing.
No, it was byproduct from copper and nickel mines.
Oh, right.
And the palladium platinum was really only looked for as standalone, without the base metals, without nickel and copper, from about the late 90s. And we were one of those people who started looking at the early phase.
So infrastructure is good for miners, basically.
The infrastructure in Kola is amazing because we've got the main road from Murmansk, the port on the Arctic, down to St. Petersburg goes through our license. Right. As does the rail link is just outside the license, and the power line is in the license.
So perfect for...
Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's a 50,000 man city 6 kilometres away.
So you've got plenty of labour then, haven't you?
It's not a problem.
Just going back, gentlemen, touched on the financials, cash flow, obviously important to potential shareholders. I think you're talking about a 2-year build you mentioned just then, and then a 4-year payback for the money you borrowed to produce it. What are your plans in terms of shareholder return after that? Will you hopefully start returning some capital and
That would
dividends?
be wonderful.
That's the plan.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are other ways. I mean, usually junior companies do other things. For instance, they sell the project or sell down, or and distribute an interim to shareholders who support it during the exploration. There's a lot of ways. I couldn't answer the question now. It's way too soon. But I'm in favour. Yeah.
And timescales. When do you think you'll have discovery certificate, and when do you think you'll have
well,
a
30 to
title?
40 days for the discovery certificate. It's
And
the
you'll
normal time. I mean, you can't predict. I mean, for instance, August, Moscow shuts down. Okay, so if it was to stretch just into the beginning of August, I'd just say, oh well, September. But otherwise, we should expect to see it in that sort of time.
And the first sort of construction phases begin?
Well, if the mine license takes, say, roughly 12 months from today, assuming the timescale I gave you already, then we would be looking at maybe. Well, it depends really on the detailed design. When we kick that off, but construction from mid-year, from mid-18.
Okay.
Is a possibility.
So not that far away, really,
No.
is it? No, not in the life of a mine, anyway.
Yes.
Any other questions, anybody? No? Thank you very much, Chris.